every week we turn to our special contributor Larry Summers of Harvard to give us the highs and the lows and sometimes just the plain odd of the week. Let's call it Summers Says and get through as much of this as we can in a rather packed week, starting with our first question, Larry, which is, what was the biggest surprise for you this week?
That the President of the United States decided to give 18 hours of on-the-record interview to Bob Woodward with audio tapes that Woodward could make public. It was a prescription for showing his soul to the world in a context where he couldn't possibly have ended up looking good. In fact, he ended up almost worse than one could have imagined. But the decision to do that was inexplicable to me.
Well, and particularly because it's not like Woodward has never done this to anybody before. I mean, if you knew anything about Woodward's past, he's done this to person after person after person.
I mean, it says two interesting things. It says something about the degree of hubris the president has, and it says something about either the lack of strength, quality or lack of strength of his advisors. Because if anyone in any of the administrations I had served in had had any idea like that for the President of the United States, there would have been a clamor from everyone who worked in the White House that it was crazy and dangerous.
Yep.
So it was a mystery to me, but it's neither the first nor the last mystery about how this president conducts himself in office.
That also assumes that the president actually listens to any of his advisors. I'm not sure there's proof of that.
That's the point. Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
Okay. How about on the radar? Whether it's next week, next month, next year, what's on your radar that should be on ours that maybe isn't?
I think we need to pay attention to fluctuations in the dollar. For a long time, currency fluctuations have not been a large issue, but they could be again, especially if we hit a stretch after the election when there's a basic loss of confidence in the way our system is functioning. In the context of a disputed election, I could see a substantial judgment by investors not to want to hold U.S. assets, and certainly not to want to hold U.S. assets as a hedge against risk. So we've been in a period where the focus has been on the interest bond market, the focus has been on the stock market, the focus has been less on the foreign exchange market, and I'm wondering whether that's something that will deserve a careful look going forward. I think it could also go in the other direction. The dollar's traded down significantly in recent months, and maybe the euro deserves to have strengthened, or maybe this is something of a false dawn in Europe, and Europe's going to encounter a variety of challenges going forward. I just think there's more happening that could hit the value of the dollar than there has been in a while, and so people need to be braced for significant changes in exchange rates and for those to ramify into our markets. More broadly, I think that so far, emerging markets have provided less drama than most of us would have expected during the COVID period, and that could easily change in the months ahead. The figures today suggesting almost 1 million new cases of COVID in India were pretty scary.
Right. And maybe we got a little bit of a taste of the uncertainty about the currency markets this week when the pound really took it on the chin after Boris Johnson said he was just going to walk away from his deal. But how do you discount or how do you price in a really uncertain result of the election? Not who's going to win, but even whether we're going to know it and what it will take to do that. I'm a lawyer. I've studied law. I've covered these elections a long time. I really don't know how to project what's going to happen in November, December, even January, perhaps.
I think that's a real risk. I think it's a risk for the dollar. I think it's a big risk for equity markets. If you look at what traders would call the forward curve of volatility, it is showing record high levels of volatility standing out around the period after the election. There's likely to be some substantial difference between the people who vote in person and the people who vote by mail, which means that the votes that are counted on election day could give a quite misleading signal as to the result of the election. The Bush v. Gore thing was a serious challenge to the quality of American democracy, but there was no one who doubted that if some legal process ended in Al Gore losing the election, he would accept that defeat and urge his successors to do so. And the same thing was true with respect to President Bush. I'm not sure we can say that right now about the current president of the United States. And I think that does create a huge aura of uncertainty, and finally, which will have economic and market consequences.
Yeah, and finally, Larry, what about conventional wisdom? Where was it wrong this week? Often we find it's wrong. Where did you find it particularly mistaken?
I think where it may be wrong on a very broad issue, David, is conventional wisdom thinks that what we have to fear is a super strong Chinese economy. I think we have to fear at least equally much that China hits huge economic turbulence, and in order to keep their society together, they rally around nationalist ideas and aggressive ideas, and that becomes a source of conflict between the United States and China. I am as nervous or more nervous about Chinese economic failure than I am about Chinese success. And I think the conventional wisdom should be as well, and it isn't.
Yeah, you don't want to have a wounded China feeling they're in a corner. We don't know what they might do.
We don't at all know what they might do, David, and there's plenty of history of leaders turning to nationalism and to blaming foreign powers when they have domestic difficulties as a way of rallying their populations. And the legitimacy of the Chinese government has depended on the economic success it has delivered. And if that economic success starts to diminish, they will need other sources of legitimacy, and aggressiveness within Asia and hostility to the United States and pointing to purported American threats are potential sources of that legitimacy, and that could lead to a much more contentious world.
Which may read against the election, actually, because a disengagement of the two economies between the United States and China would not help China in that regard, if that's something that we are terribly concerned about. Right, Larry?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think that's right, David. I think that if you see a period of huge uncertainty, who could imagine that there'd be doubt about who was in charge in the United States or what the lawful order was? That has to be something that potential adversaries look at